A young boy sell lemonades to cover father funeral costs, and then Mel Gibson walks in and changes everything. Jake Reynolds gripped the crumpled $5 bill in his small hands, his fingers tracing the creases as if he could somehow smooth out the wrinkles of his life along with it. He sat at the kitchen table, staring at the nearly empty mason jar of money he'd been collecting. A total of $36.50. Not even close to what he needed. The house was quiet. Too quiet. It had been that way since his father passed away 2 weeks ago. His mother barely spoke anymore. She spent most of her time curled up in bed, the weight of grief pressing down on her so heavily that it seemed she could hardly breathe, let alone function. The bills sat unopened on the counter, growing in number each day. And the funeral. That was a cost they simply couldn't afford. Jake was only 11, but he understood more than most kids his age. He understood that death wasn't just about sadness. It was about money, too, about debts and bills and responsibilities that didn't go away just because your heart was broken. His father had been the sole provider, and now that he was gone, their world was crumbling. That was when he decided he had to do something. Jake had seen kids selling lemonade before. He had even tried it once when he was younger, but back then it had been for fun, not for survival. Now it was different. He wasn't just a kid with a summer hobby. He was a boy trying to pay for his father's funeral. He scoured the kitchen, gathering supplies, an old plastic pitcher, a stack of red Solo cups and half a bag of sugar. They didn't have fresh lemons, but there was a dusty bottle of lemon juice in the fridge. It would have to do. He mixed the lemonade carefully, tasting it, adjusting the sugar, and adding more water until it was just right. With determination, he dragged an old folding table to the front yard, setting up his stand on the edge of the sidewalk. He found some cardboard in the garage and used a thick black marker to write lemonade. 50C below it, in smaller letters. He hesitated before adding, raising money for my dad's funeral. He swallowed hard as he read the words. Maybe that was too much. Maybe people would think he was trying to play on their emotions, but it was the truth, and the truth was all he had. The sun beat down on him as he sat behind the table, waiting. The neighborhood was quiet, just like always. A few cars passed, but none stopped. He waved at a woman walking her dog, but she barely glanced in his direction. Minutes stretched into an hour. Jake's stomach grumbled, but he ignored it. He wasn't giving up. Finally, a car pulled over. It was an older man wearing a baseball cap and a plaid shirt. He stepped out and approached the stand. "How much?" the man asked, squinting at the sign. 50 cents, Jake said. The man handed him $1. "Keep the change, kid." Jake's heart lifted as he poured the lemonade and passed it over. "Thank you, sir." The man took a sip, nodded approvingly, and then walked back to his car. It wasn't much, but it was something. Over the next 2 hours, a few more people stopped by. A mother with a toddler bought a cup, giving Jake $2. An elderly woman dropped in $5 without even taking a drink. "I'm sorry about your daddy," she said softly, patting his hand before walking away. By the time the afternoon sun began to dip, Jake counted his earnings. $14. It was more than he had started with, but still not enough, not even close. His throat tightened as he stared at the money. He had tried. He had really tried. But it wasn't working. Maybe no one cared. Maybe life was just unfair, and there was nothing he could do about it. Just as he was about to start packing up, a sleek black SUV slowed to a stop in front of his stand. The tinted window rolled down, and a man with dark sunglasses peered out. Jake squinted at him, his breath hitching slightly. There was something familiar about the man's face, even behind the glasses. The door opened, and the man stepped out. He was wearing a black leather jacket, his hair slightly unkempt, his jaw lined with stubble. He moved with a kind of effortless confidence, like someone who knew exactly who he was and didn't need to prove anything to anyone. Jake's heart pounded. Was this who he thought it was? The man pulled off his sunglasses and gave a small smile. "How's business, kid?" Jake's mouth went dry. He knew that voice. He had heard it before in movies, on TV. It was Mel Gibson. Jake blinked, not sure if he was dreaming. It's okay, I guess." Mel glanced at the sign, his expression shifting as he read the smaller text. For a moment, he didn't say anything. Then he exhaled and reached into his jacket pocket. "How much is a cup?" he asked. 50 cents, Jake said, still in shock. Mel pulled out a $20 bill and handed it over. "I'll take one." Jake scrambled to pour the lemonade, his hands shaking slightly. He passed the cup to Mel, who took a slow sip, nodding thoughtfully. "Not bad," he said with a wink. Jake stared at the bill in his hand. $20. It was more than he had made all day, but something told him that this wasn't just about lemonade anymore. Mel Gibson had just walked into his life, and something was about to change. Jake couldn't stop staring. The man standing in front of him, casually sipping lemonade like he was just another guy on the street, was Mel Gibson. The same Mel Gibson who had been in movies his dad used to watch all the time. His brain struggled to catch up with reality, and for a moment all he could do was stand there, gripping the $20 bill like it might disappear if he let go. Mel lowered the cup, smacking his lips as if truly evaluating the lemonade. "Not bad," he said again, nodding approvingly. "You make this yourself?" Jake found his voice, though it was barely above a whisper. "Yeah, kind of. We didn't have real lemons, so I used the bottled stuff." Mel grinned. "Smart thinking. Work with what you've got." He leaned against the table, tilting his head as he glanced at the cardboard sign. His eyes lingered on the words, "Raising money for my dad's funeral." His expression changed. Just a flicker of something softer, more serious. "That true, kid?" Jake nodded, his throat suddenly tight. He didn't want to talk about it, not with a stranger, not even with Mel Gibson. But there was something about the way Mel looked at him, like he actually cared about the answer. So Jake swallowed hard and forced himself to speak. "Yeah, my dad passed away 2 weeks ago. We don't have enough money for the funeral." Mel let out a slow breath, nodding as if he understood. "That's tough," he said quietly. He didn't offer empty words like, "I'm sorry for your loss," or "That must be hard." He just stood there, letting the weight of the truth settle between them. Then, after a moment, he straightened up, his entire demeanor shifting. "All right," he said, clapping his hands together. "We're gonna fix this." Jake blinked. "Fix what?" Mel gestured to the stand. "This, the lemonade stand. We're gonna make it the best damn lemonade stand this town has ever seen." Jake frowned. "I don't think that's gonna help. I made $14 all day." "Yeah, well, you didn't have me helping, did you?" Mel flashed a grin, pulling his sunglasses from his jacket pocket and sliding them on. "Trust me, kid. We're about to turn this into something big." Before Jake could even respond, Mel grabbed the cardboard sign and studied it. "This needs some work. Got any more markers?" Jake hurried inside to grab the markers while his heart pounded against his ribs. Was this really happening? Was Mel Gibson actually helping him sell lemonade? When he rushed back outside, Mel had already dragged the table closer to the street, making it more visible. Mel took the markers and flipped the cardboard over. In bold, confident strokes, he rewrote the sign. Lemonade. One buy a cup, help a kid give his dad a proper goodbye. He turned it around for Jake to see. "We're raising. The price, 50 cents, is too low. People will pay $1, trust me." Jake hesitated. "But what if they don't? They will." Mel gave him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Now, we need customers." He pulled out his phone, took a selfie with Jake in front of the stand, and started typing. Within seconds, he posted it. Boom. Let's see what happens. Jake stood there, gripping the pitcher of lemonade, unsure of what to expect, but he didn't have to wait long. A car pulled up within minutes, and a woman rolled down her window. "Oh my God, is that Mel Gibson?" she gasped. Mel grinned and waved. "Sure is, and we've got the best lemonade in town, so you better come try some." The woman parked, practically sprinting over with her phone out to snap a picture. "This is crazy," she laughed. "I'll take 3 cups." Jake poured the lemonade, still in shock, as she handed over a $20 bill. "Keep the change," she said with a wink, and then another car stopped, and another. Word spread like wildfire. People started showing up just to see what was going on, and when they saw Mel Gibson behind the table, they couldn't hand over their money fast enough. Some bought lemonade, some just threw cash into Jake's jar. Then, something even crazier happened. A local news van pulled up. A reporter stepped out, adjusting her blazer as she approached. "We heard there's something special happening here," she said, glancing at Mel before turning to Jake. "Mind if we ask you a few questions?" Jake's hands were shaking as he nodded. The reporter crouched beside him, microphone in hand. "Tell us what made you start this lemonade stand." He took a deep breath, trying to steady his voice. I just wanted to help my mum pay for my dad's funeral. We don't have enough money, and I didn't know what else to do." The reporter's expression softened. "And then Mel Gibson showed up?" Jake nodded. "Yeah, and he made everything better." Mel smirked. "I just bought a cup of lemonade and gave him a little marketing advice. The kid's the real star. Here." The reporter smiled, and within minutes the camera crew was filming. Mel waved at the camera, encouraging people to come down and support Jake's cause. Then the unthinkable happened. Jake's phone started buzzing. He didn't even realize he was trending on social media until the reporter showed him. Lemonade for Dad was everywhere. Donations were flooding in online, people were promising to stop by, and celebrities were even re-sharing the story. By the time the sun began to set, the lemonade stand had collected thousands of dollars. People weren't just giving $1 per cup, they were handing over 20s, 50s, even hundreds. A man in a business suit walked up and quietly dropped a check for $5,000 into the jar before walking away. Jake could hardly process it. Just that morning, he had felt like the world didn't care. Now, strangers were showing up in droves, handing him money, offering condolences, and telling him how brave he was. Mel put a hand on his shoulder as they watched the crowd. "Told you we'd fix this." Jake looked up at him, his eyes wide. "I don't even know how to thank you." Mel crouched down to his level. "You already did, kid. Just keep going, and remember, your dad would be proud." Jake swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but for the first time in 2 weeks, he felt like maybe, just maybe, things were going to be okay. Jake sat behind his lemonade stand, staring in disbelief at the overflowing jar of cash in front of him. Just hours ago, he had been struggling to make a few dollars, desperate to contribute something, anything, to his father's funeral expenses. Now he had more than he ever could have imagined. The donations had started small, a few dollars here and there. But once word spread, everything changed. People from all over the city had shown up, some just to see if the story was real, others eager to support him. Some gave $20 bills, others handed over 50s and hundreds without even asking for lemonade. A few simply shook his hand, pressed cash into his palm, and walked away with quiet words of encouragement. As the sun dipped lower in the sky, Jake found himself overwhelmed. He had lost count of how much money was in the jar, but it didn't matter. He knew without a doubt that it was enough. More than enough. He could finally give his dad the funeral he deserved. His mom wouldn't have to sit at the kitchen table crying over unpaid bills. For the first time since his dad had passed, Jake felt like he had done something right. Mel stood beside him, arms crossed as he watched the last few customers drift away. Even with sunglasses back on, he seemed to sense Jake's emotions. "Looks like we did it, kid," he said, nudging him lightly with an elbow. Jake nodded, still unable to fully grasp what had happened. "Yeah, I guess we did." Mel reached for the nearly full pitcher of lemonade and poured himself another cup. "No, when I stopped by earlier, I wasn't expecting all this." He took a sip, smirking. "I just wanted a cold drink." Jake finally cracked a small smile. "Guess you got more than you bargained for." Mel chuckled, then set the cup down, turning serious. "Listen, kid, I know today was big, but I want you to remember something. It's not just about the money. What you did today, that's who you are. You didn't sit around waiting for someone to fix things for you. You took action. That's rare." Jake looked down at the table, tracing a small ring of condensation left by a cup. I didn't know what else to do. I felt like everything was falling apart." Mel nodded. "That's life, kid. It's gonna feel like that sometimes. But you keep going anyway. That's what your dad would want, right?" Jake swallowed hard, nodding. "Yeah, he always told me to be strong." "There you go," Mel said. "That's how you honor him. Not just by paying for the funeral, but by living, by making something of yourself. You got fight in you, Jake. Don't lose that." Jake absorbed Mel's words, letting them sink in. His dad had always believed in hard work, in doing whatever it took to take care of family. Maybe Jake had done more than just raise money today. Maybe he had proven to himself that he could take care of things. The roar of an approaching car pulled his attention away. A familiar blue sedan slowed to a stop at the curb. The driver's side door opened, and his mother stepped out, her expression unreadable. She had been inside all day, lost in grief, while Jake had been out here trying to change their lives. He wondered if she'd be upset, or if she'd even understand what had happened. She walked toward the stand slowly, her eyes flicking between Jake, the nearly empty lemonade pitcher, and the jar overflowing with bills. Her lips parted as if she wanted to speak, but no words came out. Jake hesitated before standing up. "Mom, Before he could finish, she pulled him into a tight hug. He felt her shoulders shake, heard her take a deep, unsteady breath. "I saw you on the news," she whispered against his hair. "Jake, what have you done?" He tensed, unsure if she was angry or proud. "I just wanted to help," he said, his voice muffled against her shoulder. She pulled back slightly, cupping his face in her hands, her eyes glistening with tears. "You did more than help," she murmured. You saved us." Jake blinked, his own emotions welling up. He had wanted to make things better, but hearing her say it out loud made it feel real. Mel cleared his throat, stepping back to give them space. "Hell of a kid you got here," he told her. "He's got heart." Jake's mother turned to him, her eyes widening slightly as she finally seemed to register who was standing there. "Oh my God," she whispered, wiping at her face. "Are you—" Mel chuckled. "Yeah, but today's not about me, it's about him." He nodded toward Jake, then glanced at the darkening sky. "I should probably get going." Jake's stomach clenched. Somehow, in all the chaos of the day, he hadn't thought about what happened after. Mel had helped him, turned his small idea into something huge, but he wasn't staying. "Wait," Jake blurted. "I mean, you don't have to go right away." Mel smiled, but there was something in his expression, something Jake recognized, a kind of knowing sadness, the understanding that all good things eventually came to an end. "You're going to be okay, kid," Mel said. "You got more people behind you than you realize, and if there's one thing I know, it's that you're stronger than you think." He reached out, giving Jake's shoulder a firm squeeze. "Keep going." Jake felt his throat tighten again, but this time it wasn't from sadness. It was something else. Hope. Mel turned, heading toward his SUV. He slid into the driver's seat, started the engine, then gave one last wave before pulling away. Jake stood there watching as the taillights faded down the street. He had no idea if he would ever see Mel Gibson again. Maybe this was just one of those once-in-a-lifetime things, but that didn't matter. because today had changed everything. He wasn't just a kid trying to scrape by anymore. He wasn't powerless. He wasn't alone. As his mom put an arm around him, holding him close, he let himself believe, for the first time in weeks, that they were going to be okay. Maybe even better than okay. And for the first time since his dad died, Jake smiled. Jake stood beside his mother, his eyes still locked on the spot where Mel Gibson's SUV had disappeared down the road. It felt surreal, like waking up from an incredible dream, only to realize it had actually happened. Just hours ago, he had been sitting at this same lemonade stand, hopeless and exhausted, thinking his efforts would never be enough. And now, he had more than just money. He had something he hadn't felt in weeks: hope. His mother squeezed his shoulder gently, bringing his attention back to her. She was still staring at the overflowing jar of cash, her face a mix of disbelief and emotion. "Jake," she murmured, shaking her head, "I can't believe you did all this." Jake shifted on his feet. "I didn't do it alone." She gave him a small smile, still teary-eyed. "No, but you started it. You never gave up." The words made his chest swell with something warm. He hadn't thought of it that way, but she was right. Even when business had been slow, even when it felt impossible, he had stayed, he had tried, and because of that, because he hadn't walked away, something amazing had happened. His mother wiped at her face again and let out a shaky breath. "We should get this money somewhere safe," she said. "It's enough, Jake, not just for the funeral, but to help us get back on our feet." He nodded, swallowing the lump in his throat. "I know." They carefully gathered the money, stacking the bills as neatly as they could, and placing them into a shoebox from the house. Even as they packed it away, Jake couldn't help but glance at the spot where Mel had stood, directing people to the stand with that effortless charm of his. It had been more than just a lucky break. Mel had given him advice, sure, but he had also given him belief in himself. His mother must have noticed the way he kept looking down the road because she touched his arm gently. "You really liked him, didn't you?" Jake hesitated, then nodded. "Yeah, I mean, he didn't have to do any of this, you know. He could have just given me money and left, but he didn't. He cared." His mother's face softened, and she pulled him into another hug, this time slower, gentler. "I think your dad would have liked him." The words caught Jake off guard. He blinked up at her. "Yeah?" she nodded. "Your father always admired people who stood up for others, people who didn't just walk past when they saw someone struggling. That's the kind of man he was. And Jake," she placed a hand on his cheek, "that's the kind of man you're becoming." Jake felt his throat tighten again, but he didn't fight it this time. He let the feeling settle in his chest, let himself believe her words, because maybe, just maybe, she was right. The days that followed felt like something out of a movie. The story of the lemonade stand kept spreading. News outlets reached out for interviews. People on social media continued sharing their support, and donations even kept trickling in online. But the most important thing wasn't the attention, it was what happened at home. For the first time since his dad passed, his mom wasn't just lying in bed, drowning in grief. She was moving again. She was smiling. She sat at the kitchen table with Jake, going through bills and figuring out a plan. They weren't out of the woods yet, but for the first time, they had a path forward. And Jake? He felt different, stronger. One evening, as he sat in his room scrolling through the countless messages of support on his phone, a thought crossed his mind. Maybe Mel had been right. Maybe what happened wasn't just luck, it was proof that when you refuse to give up, the world notices. People help. His fingers hovered over his phone's keyboard. He hesitated, then typed out a message on social media. "Thank you to everyone who helped me and my mom. You didn't just help us pay for the funeral, you reminded us that we're not alone. I'll never forget this." He hit post and set the phone down, exhaling slowly. A part of him still wished Mel hadn't left so soon, but as he replayed their last conversation in his mind, he understood why. Mel hadn't just been there to help him raise money. He had been there to remind him of something much more important. You're stronger than you know. Keep going, Jake would, and no matter where life took him next, he would always remember the day a movie star stopped by his lemonade stand and helped him change everything, not just for his family, but for himself.